Hello! Okay, for those of you returning to the channel, welcome back, and for those of you that are new here, that have just stumbled upon this video, then thank you for joining me. And here is my spoiler-free review of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, the sequel to Dead Reckoning, and the 8th installment within the Mission Impossible film series. You got Christopher McQuarrie once again directing, and I've been really looking forward to this movie. I've loved what Christopher McQuarrie has been doing with these films, and I just love sort of the authenticity behind bringing these movies to life. You know, for me, these films are good old-fashioned traditional action-adventure filmmaking, where you have the stunts, you have the action all happening within the frame with very, very little CGI. And yes, it's just we don't get movies like this anymore, and so I'm always looking forward to one of these films. So the movie follows Ethan Hunt and his team as they race against time to stop Gabriel, an agent working for the rogue AI known as the Entity, from obtaining the source code, a core module hidden in a sunken Russian submarine. This module holds the key to controlling or destroying the Entity, which threatens global security. So, right off the bat here, I'm just going to sort of dive straight into one of the sort of major issues I had with this movie. It's an issue, but it isn't one that kind of really sort of took away from my overall enjoyment of this movie. But it is a very sort of, for me anyway, it was a very glaring issue that the movie had. And that was its first act, and how this first act of the story sort of came together. It's very messy, it's very sloppy, and it made me wonder, who was making this movie? While I was watching the first act, I was thinking to myself, especially sort of the introduction, sort of the opening sort of moments, the first 5 to 10 minutes, it kind of left me thinking, who made this movie? Because having watched the previous two films by Christopher McQuarrie, it just felt very different. Like, it didn't feel like there were elements of Christopher McQuarrie there, but just the way in which everything sort of came together from a sort of a narrative perspective and how everything sort of flowed, it just kind of felt very sort of disjointed and just sort of sloppy in how it all came together. And it kind of left me thinking, did somebody else come in to sort of finish this movie off or direct this film? Did the studio sort of take over? Or, you know, was it Christopher McQuarrie? Like, it kind of lacked sort of the Christopher McQuarrie stamp, you could say, that we've come to expect with his previous films. And just the way in which the first act came together here, it just has a very clunky first act in how everything comes together. It tries too hard to bring everyone up to speed with the story, to the point where it felt quite insulting. Like, you know, it was almost treating us, the viewer, as if we were dumb because we couldn't quite keep up with what had happened previously. Like, I get it, you know, if you've not seen any of these movies before and you've not seen, you know, Dead Reckoning, I kind of get it. But at the same time, it was quite sort of sloppy and lazy in how it attempted to sort of bring everyone up to speed with its story and the way in which it did it. Like, it was using a lot of flashbacks. There are a lot of callbacks to sort of the previous movies in this film. And sort of it ties in a lot of sort of character stories and sort of aspects to certain stories within the previous movies in a way that, for the most part, I felt like in this film was really well done in sort of how it ties in those sort of different aspects from previous movies into this story. For the most part, it's done very well. But within, say, the first 20, 30 minutes of this movie, the way in which they do it, it felt very sloppy. It felt very kind of engineered or forced in to the narrative, which for me personally resulted, I felt, you know, with the messiness that I was getting, sort of the messiness that I felt like that first act had. It was just sort of really being very lazy within the writing and within how everything flowed, to sort of how it kind of brought that first act together. And even though I felt like when it comes to the callbacks and when it comes to sort of bringing sort of characters from previous movies and sort of tying them into the story. Like I just said, they do that really well, more so within the second and third act. Like, I can't go into too much detail about that because this is a spoiler-free review. And I just felt like it was reflected within the writing as well, not just how the narrative flowed within that first act. To the point where the writing in this movie, I think the writing overall in this movie was one of the weakest elements for me. It kind of leans into the sort of the straightforwardness of its story. Like, the story is very straightforward. This is probably one of the more straightforward, basic stories within the Mission Impossible movies. And I just feel like the first act kind of tries to make it a little bit more complicated than what it actually is. So that they try to sort of do something to the story where they're kind of trying to engineer it in a way that kind of makes it feel or make it appear more complex than it actually is. Whereas actually it's not. It's really sort of like, you take away sort of the messiness of its first act, and, you know, this is a very, out of all the Mission Impossible movies, I feel like this was probably the most straightforward story or conclusion to the story, because this story does start with dead reckoning. And to sort of then touch back on the writing, I mean, the writing kind of leans into that, I felt. And so it did make me wonder, was it intentional? Because this is a straight up, you know, we got our hero, Ethan Hunt, he has to stop Gabriel and sort of stop Doomsday. And it is, you know, straightforward, fun, it's a fun, entertaining ride. But at times, I also found the writing quite insulting, and I sort of rolled my eyes in moments, because it's dialogue that had, for a majority of the time, kind of this one purpose, and that was to be exposition. It was very exposition heavy within the dialogue in moments. Another major issue that I had with this movie was its villain. The same issue, in fact, that I had with the first part, and that is Gabriel. Now, he's played by an Isai Morales. Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly there. But he plays the villain who is being sort of controlled by this AI entity. And I like what he does. Like, I mean, he does a good job. Like, he does a solid job with this villain. There is somewhat of a sort of a weight there due to how, you know, he's kind of got this presence, this kind of very commanding presence whenever he's on the screen. But it's only sort of, it's satisfying, but I always found myself really wanted more from the villain. You know, this, for me personally, was a very two-dimensional, cardboard cutout villain. And even though I thought he was doing an okay job, I think he was doing a good job with bringing the character to life. Like I said, when he's on the screen, there is a presence there, you feel the presence. At the same time, it was lacking a depth. And sometimes the effectiveness of these stories can be impacted by sort of how well the villain is sort of plays a part within that story, in how well sort of the villain is written within the story. And sometimes these stories, you know, especially the sort of the more straightforward sort of action movies, sort of kind of really rely, I feel, or, you know, need to sort of really rely on sort of the effectiveness and sort of how sort of well written and sort of the part that the villain plays within that story. I mean, sometimes it can all hinge on sort of the villain and sort of the villain's role within the story. I'm not saying that sort of goes for every sort of straightforward action movie, but for me personally, I just felt like the villain in here, he does an okay job. You know, it's satisfying to a degree, but I kind of just found myself really wanting more from him. But then it kind of also played into sort of the overall movie's sort of tone and story. Just like with the writing, you know, quite conflicted with the writing. When I say conflicted, I mean because of the clunkiness of this movie's setup, that first act, it just made me wonder sort of what was the sort of the overall direction of where they really wanted to go with this movie. And that is kind of reflected within the writing and sort of the role of the villain and sort of how he sort of plays a part into the story and all of that. These were the issues that I had with this overall experience. And then that kind of the clunkiness that we're getting, sort of the sloppiness with this narrative and how the film plays out. everything sort of starts to settle as we get into the second act and into the third act of this movie. And that's when it really truly starts to feel like Christopher McQuarrie is fully at the helm again. I had a lot of fun with this movie. It was entertaining. It was thrilling. For me, this movie was a love letter to good old-fashioned, traditional filmmaking. You know, taking you back to sort of those kind of classic action-adventure movies where you've got a hero performing the stunt within the frame. And it's all, again, once again, brought to life here beautifully. There are two action set pieces within this film. There's one in the ocean, in this Russian submarine, and you've also got the biplane scene, which is all in the trailers, and they are fucking phenomenal from every aspect, from every element. You know, from the sound design, visually, just how these moments are constructed and how they play out. Like the sub scene, for example, is incredibly intense, and a lot of that is aided by the sound design and just how that moment plays out. It feels authentic. It feels real. You know, it feels like our hero is there under the ocean in this Russian sub. You feel the threat. You feel the thrill of the moment. You're there sucked into the sort of that moment with the character. And this is what these movies do incredibly well. And, you know, the biplane scene as well is absolutely breathtaking. I highly recommend you watch this film in IMAX. Like, I was sitting there and my stomach was fucking turning. Just from the way in which the camera is positioned, to the way in which the scene plays out, to sort of Tom Cruise doing his thing. It was incredibly intense. It was incredibly fun. And it kind of, in many ways, it made me tear up a little bit. And there are a couple of moments, actually, in fact, that made me tear up a little bit. More so within the third act and towards its climax. But just like from a filmmaking perspective, this movie hit hard. Because it was bringing to life an aspect of filmmaking that I absolutely adore. That we don't really get a lot of these days. Like, we do still get it. We still got these movies that are coming out where they kind of really want to go back to sort of bringing these movies to life in a way that does feel grounded, that does feel authentic, that you can actually buy into what is happening within the frame. But it also felt like a love letter to those movies. You know, to those kind of classic action-adventure movies that were made, you know, sort of in a very traditional way. And I could just sense that love within the frame. For me, Tom Cruise and what he does is kind of like a symbol of what Hollywood was, you know, when it comes to good old-fashioned traditional filmmaking. And these scenes, these moments, they do exactly what they need to do. They are thrilling, you're caught up within the moment. And even though I have my issues with the villain, for example, these moments are so breathtaking. Whether it is just this kind of more intense, sort of slow pace moment like the Russian sub scene or the biplane scene, they do exactly what they need to do, and they were incredible. They were breathtaking. The way they were brought to life from a technical perspective was just phenomenal. And the other thing that I really liked about this story, you know, it is a very straightforward story, and that's not my issue. You know, with the story being as kind of straightforward as it is, you know, that wasn't my problem. My problem was sort of, at times, the writing just felt a little sloppy, a little lazy, as well as that first act. But this is a straight-up action-adventure movie where you've got a hero who needs to stop the villain. And what I really liked about this story was sort of kind of who the main villain was and how it makes this kind of movie, this entire experience, very relevant. Like, it does in many ways reflect our current times and the dangers that we are facing as a planet. And it does it in a way that is very well done. It's not too heavy-handed, and they touch on all of these sort of different themes. I just love how religion was used within aspects of his story, from a visual perspective to sort of, you know, how it explores certain themes around sort of indoctrination, for example, and sort of how people sort of gravitate towards this kind of one ideology and just sort of how all of that kind of played into the story. It's there, but it's, like I said, it's not heavy-handed. It doesn't get bogged down by it. And I thought it was done incredibly well. And I think what they also do really well here is creating that sense of dread, that kind of the sense of impending doom, like doom is coming, and you sense that fear. It gives you chills because of how the film accurately sort of reflects the sort of, you know, the time that we're in, as well as sort of the dangers that possibly lie ahead. And I think the movie does that very well. At times it's quite horrifying, in fact, sort of the way in which it's sort of brought to life visually. And just from, you know, like going back to the religious aspect, how religion is sort of tied into all of that, you know, and sort of from a visual perspective to sort of the story to sort of where we end up with these characters in the third act. It's just one of those aspects of its story that I found myself being really compelled by. I think they did it really well. And then just going back to sort of how the movie was brought to life from a technical perspective, to how, you know, they shot on location. I mean, when you're in South Africa, you're in South Africa. Yeah, and just, again, it just adds to the authenticity of the movie. You feel like you're on this adventure with these characters. And so, with all those kind of issues aside, yes, there are issues with this experience. And even though it kind of levels off as we get into sort of the second and third act of the movie, this, for me, was a very fun, thrilling, entertaining ride where it actually is, you know, kind of hit me emotionally as well. Like, it wasn't, it wasn't something that emotionally drained me or had me sort of.
And today I'm the age you were when you left.
Really kind of crying. It was not that, but it was nothing like that. But there are moments that it just kind of made me tear up because it was doing exactly what I want a film like this to do. Because it was immersing me into this story. I cared about my main character, Ethan, played by Tom Cruise. I mean, Tom Cruise is incredible, and, you know, he's great at bringing this character to life, but just the fact that he throws himself into these roles, and, you know, he doing the stunts himself and all of that, and just from a filmmaking perspective, all of those elements, and having been with these characters now for so many years, there was just something about how they did wrap this story up. It did. It kind of, I'm not going to lie, I'm going to admit it. I teared up a little bit. And I think a lot of it, you know, the core reason for that for me really was really down to how this movie was crafted and how it was brought to life. It did feel not only a love letter to the previous movies, but a love letter to good old-fashioned traditional filmmaking. Because to witness it come to life on the screen, you know, year within the Final Reckoning was truly breathtaking. And so, with this being a spoiler-free review, I'm not going to go into sort of, you know, obviously the final and what happens with our character and how they wrap it up with Ethan Hunt and his story. Like I said, I kind of really liked how characters from previous movies and certain aspects of the stories from previous movies played a part into this story. I think it worked for the most part very well, and it felt quite seamless. It felt quite natural and organic. It's just that first act for me where it just kind of was very disjointed and clunky and sloppy. It's going to be very hard to talk about how sort of the conclusion to this story, you know, the conclusion to Ethan Hunt's story in a way that doesn't mildly spoil something. And so I'm going to put a spoiler warning by you now just in case, but I'm going to try my best not to give too much away. So with that being said, how the story concludes, for me personally, it made complete sense. This is a movie that needed to end with hope. That needed to end with you coming out of it thinking, whoa, that was thrilling, that was intense, but happy, feeling good. I think if they'd gone down another route, which they definitely tease, not just with Ethan Hunt, but with Benji Dunn, for example, I'm not sure if it would have really have worked and has been as effective, I felt, as it was. And the reason behind that being was everything that I've already said about the movie in what I liked or how I felt or what I felt like they were sort of attempting to do with this film, with it being a love letter to not just the previous movies but to traditional action adventure filmmaking. You know, there is a reveal in the movie's conclusion, and I let out a sigh of relief. There were even people within the audience, you could hear it. There was a sigh of relief. And it was like, yeah, that was absolutely the right decision to make. Otherwise, I felt like they would have truly lost what they were trying or attempting to do here with this movie. And it just worked beautifully. And you could probably guess what it is that I'm saying here. I'm trying to be as cryptic as I can, but I didn't really, you know, I felt like I had to talk about it because it was an aspect or a decision that they made that I really liked. What they did with the story and sort of what they did with Ethan Hunt's character. And I think if they'd gone the other route, it just wouldn't have worked as well. I do feel like the film would have benefited from being perhaps a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more leaner. I did come out of it thinking, even though I didn't really feel like it's almost clocking in, it wasn't quite 3 hours long. I think it was something like 2 hours and 45 minutes. I didn't feel that. At the same time, I kind of felt like, thinking back on it, reflecting, that it didn't really need to be. And I think that the clunkiness and the sort of the sloppiness of his first act did play into that. Something happened behind the scenes. I don't know. I could be absolutely wrong. But you can sense it. You could kind of sense within the first portion of this movie. I'd say the first 45 minutes of this movie is kind of the earthquake, you could say. And then sort of the shockwaves are somewhat felt going into the second and third act. But it's a lot more seamless. And it feels more like a Christopher McQuarrie movie. And so, look, enough rambling on from me. A bit of a conflicting one, a bit of a frustrating one to sort of review, to talk about, because there's so much I adored about this film from a filmmaking aspect, from a filmmaking perspective. The fucking biplane is phenomenal. It is breathtaking. There's a lot that they do well with it, but it also has a lot of issues. A lot of that is within that first act, but at the same time, it does exactly what I felt like a movie like this needed to do. It wrapped me up within sort of our hero's journey. It immersed me into the hero's journey. I felt the threat. I felt the danger. I believe that our hero is there hanging off this fucking plane trying to get this villain. And even though you'll get those moments of dialogue that, you know, that felt like it had been shoehorned in just to sort of add something a little bit more sinister and just sort of be a little bit more, in many ways, patronising, actually. Issues aside, this was pure cinema. This is what cinema is all about. I highly recommend it. Watch it on the biggest screen possible. If there's one thing you're going to take away from it, I feel, personally, and that is that sense of love for filmmaking, for bringing to life these action adventure movies in a way that are truly authentic, that are truly immersive. That is the one box they truly do tick you, that they truly do achieve. And I had a fucking good time. So yeah, enough rambling from me. They are my thoughts on Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, and I will be giving The Final Reckoning they are my thoughts on Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. But what did you guys think? Have you seen it yet? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then please let me know in the comments below and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future movie reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot. I have just hit 500 subscribers. So a massive thank you to everyone that have supported the channel, from liking, commenting, subscribing. It means the world to me. It will always overwhelm me that so many of you, 500 of you, do want to follow just some random Welsh geek ramble on about film. I do ramble on, and that's why, I always say at this point in the video, if you've made it this far, thank you so much, because for any one of you that it can endure watching me ramble on for as long as I do about these movies, especially when it comes to spoiler-free reviews, then I commend you. I am a little bit behind, so apologies with videos, but I went away at the beginning of last weekend, and I didn't really get back until Wednesday, and then we also had a trip to London as well, so I am a little behind in catching up with movies. Filming my retro review for 1960s The Lost World. They are all coming, but I'm just a little behind, so apologies. But my next movie review for the latest cinema release will be for Lilo and Stitch. Now, I've not seen the original movie, and I have been toying with watching the original first, but I kind of want to go into this film not being tainted with the original for the first time, because I can't help but go into these, Disney live action remakes and just sit there comparing it to the original. Let me know, you guys let me know. Do you think I should check it out first, or should I just go straight into this live action remake? Let me know below. And yeah, that's it from me for now, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Again, thank you so much for the support. It means the world to me. It means so much. And that's it from me for now. Thank you all for watching, and I will be catching you guys soon.